School of Professional and Extended Studies, and I am delighted to co-host this series of what we are calling the Community Conversations with my co-conspirator and co-creator, Nancy Davenport. Now we'll come back to Nancy in a moment. But as you know, we have conceived of this series as a way to throw open the doors of the university, not just to ourselves. Many of us work in little silos, and it's hard to get us out of our cocoons, and so this is a great opportunity to connect people within the university, but also to connect the university with the community. Because at the end of the day, we are not about the ivory tower, we are about sharing knowledge, we're about sharing information. And we hope that this series is one way in which we can make a contribution to the critical issues of our day. And we thank you for being part of that conversation. And I very much look forward to having all of your input, not just tonight, but in future events that we do. We do this series once a month, and it is based on the Library of Congress series, 80 Books That Shaped America, that was hosted a couple of years ago. But we see this also as an opportunity to go beyond those 80 books. They were not necessarily the best books, but they were significant works that shaped American culture and American thought. And tonight I am delighted that we're able to present to you a discussion on Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Now, who better to talk about the role of books, especially when they are banned, than a librarian? And no less than the director, the dean of our own library here at American University, Nancy Davenport. I can think of few people who know more about books, but who also know about the relevance of books to society than Nancy Davenport. Before coming to AU in 2012, she was a director of library services at the public library in the District of Columbia. Prior to that, she was president of the Council on Library and Information Resources. And before then, spent many, many years with the Library of Congress in senior positions, including having directed a training program for members of parliament and their staffs in newly democratic states of Central and Eastern Europe. And I think that experience in particular, you will see, if you haven't read the book, there are some really interesting connections to the story we're going to spend time thinking about. She also has an active consulting practice, although I suspect that
less active these days.
Now that it's probably slightly less active. And she has held many board memberships, including a presidential appointment to the National Historical Records and Publications Commission of the National Archives. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over the floor in the room to Nancy Davenport.
Thank you, Carola. So I feel like I have crammed more for this presentation tonight and studied more for this presentation than for any class I've ever taken in my entire life, and I feel completely and totally unprepared all at the same time, which is actually one of the metaphors that runs completely through this book, which is that series of dichotomies and opposites that we'll talk about for a little bit this evening. My plan, unless you all want to have a different one, is that we are going to see a short video that comes off the trailer to the movie of Ray Bradbury talking about the book, this book in particular. And before you move from that, Linnea, this is my favorite image, my imagined image, although somebody else did this particular image, of what this book is really all about. It's really all about the quest for innocence, for inquiry, for discovery, and for being one's own person, and for being able, while this is a buttercup, to rub that dandelion under your chin to see who you're really in love with. That's what this book's really about. So the one that Linnea is going to pull up for us is a trailer from the movie version of this book, where he talks about the book and why he wrote it and what some of the images are in it. And I thought before we argue about it, we'd let the author speak for himself about a few pieces. Then I think we're going to have a book talk, a book discussion, rather than me talking about it. But as we go into that second phase, I'd like for you to think about the answers to two questions. And that's how we'll sum up that section of the program, which is there any book that you would consider banning from any time ever, for any reason, any purpose? And if you had to become one of the book people at the end of this book, where you represent the book, you in fact, as Bradbury describes it, you are the dust jacket for the book, which one would you want to be? Which book would you commit to memory to preserve it for all time and eternity? And then at the end, there's another clip of an evening where Bradbury was lecturing a group of students, although when you look at the audience, it's an audience like ours, composed of students and wannabe students who are a little older than the regular students, where he describes, if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader. And it's a pretty interesting discussion to end this program on. So if that's okay with all of you, we'll see the first piece of Ray Bradbury talking about his book. We need more sound. And maybe less light.
Find enough money to finance it for a while. But in the meantime, I was writing short stories. I wrote a story called The Pedestrian because I had an encounter with a policeman one night who asked me what I was doing. I was walking with a friend. And I said to the policeman, I'm putting one foot after the other, which was the wrong answer. And he was very suspicious being a pedestrian walking because I looked at the sidewalks this way and that, and there's nobody except me and my friend. So the policeman reprimanded me, and I promised never to walk again. And I went home in a rage, and I wrote this short story called The Pedestrian. And it was published finally. And then I took the pedestrian out for a walk one night in another story, and he turned the corner, and he bumps into a little girl named Clarice McFarland. And she sniffs the air, and she says to him, I know who you are. You're the fireman. You're the man that burns books. And 9 days later, Fahrenheit 451 was done. The original version of Fahrenheit was published in Galaxy magazine, a science fiction magazine. And then a young editor came along a few years later who had no money and he needed material and said, can you sell me something for $400? And I said, yes, I have a novel, Fahrenheit 451, and he bought it for $400, and that was Hugh Hefner. And it appeared in the second, third, and fourth issues of Playboy. So all the young men and all the old men of America owe me a debt of gratitude for helping start that magazine. I grew up in Waukegan, Illinois, and I walked down the beach with my father, and on the way we stopped at the fire station. And my dad knew all the firemen, and some of them were relatives of mine. And I would go in and pet the Dalmatian. And so I had an intimate knowledge of firemen. And one of my uncles was a fireman who was killed falling off a fire truck when I was a kid. And it just struck me in thinking about firemen, that what are we going to do with them in the future? The time will come when all the houses are fireproof. So you've got a lot of firemen with no job. What are you going to do? I said, well, let's reverse it. Have them start fires instead of put them out. And then I had no title for the book. The original title was The Fireman. And I got curious as to what the temperature was that book paper would burn at. And I called UCLA, the chemistry department. They couldn't help me. I called SC, some of the other physics departments, and they couldn't help me. I said, dummy, call the fire department. So I called downtown, got the fire chief on the phone. I said, this sounds stupid, but tell me, what temperature does book paper catch fire at? He said, just a moment. And he came back. He said it catches fire at 451 degrees Fahrenheit. And I reversed it. I said, Fahrenheit 451. Yes. So I don't know if that's true. I've never researched it since. But it has a wonderful sound to it, doesn't it? That's how it came to birth. And I wrote a short novel in the basement of the UCLA library because I had no office. There was a typewriter there you could rent for 10 cents a half hour. So I took a bag of dimes down there and I rented the typewriter for 9 days and spent $9.80 and wrote a dime novel. And it was published in the science fiction magazine, and later I extended it to 50,000 words, and it became the novel that you know now. The book was a long time coming to birth. You could say it went back to my great-great-great-grandmother, Mary Bradbury, who was tried as a witch in Salem in 1580. Well, she escaped, but she's in all the books about witches and witch burning. And then over the years, I read about the various libraries of Alexandria burning 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. I think twice by accident, once on purpose. And then in China, I heard rumors of burnings of libraries and books. And Hitler, of course, in Germany in the early 30s. And since I'm a library person, I've never made it to college, you see. I'm self-educated in the library. So anything that touches the library touches me, you know?
That seemed like a good place to stop that clip. So how many of you are here tonight based upon your memory of having read the book? Because that's the way a lot of us come to this event. Okay. And how many based upon either your memory or a little more recently having viewed the film? Because they're different. They're different in some interesting ways. They're different. Okay, so shall I run through sort of the basic synopsis of this deal? This is a society now where books are forbidden. To be an intellectual is, to use that word, is to swear at someone that they are an intellectual. And so our protagonist, Guy Montag in the movie, Montag in the recorded book that I have listened to for the last 5 weeks, driving back and forth to work every day, and it's only 5 CDs. He is on the crew that burns the books, and he is the member of the crew that lights the flame after they are soaked with kerosene. And so they spend their days, as Bradbury says, starting fires rather than putting them out, because the houses are all plastic now, so of course they don't burn. And they do this because different ideas just distract us. They make us uncomfortable. And all that fiction, well, those people are just imaginary. It doesn't make any difference about that. And if it's nonfiction, well, it's just two academics yelling at each other about whose idea is the better one. So being now in this is the first time I've read this book in this academic setting. So this was added another whole dimension to the book for me, of thinking of some of our colleagues who might be arguing the same thing from their various perspectives. So he comes home from a fire one night and in the book discovers his wife Mildred, in the movie her name is Linda, that Mildred is completely passed out and in fact has taken an entire bottle of sleeping pills. And she's probably one of the most vapid creatures ever invented for the purpose of a book. And the only thing she wants more in life is to have her fourth wall installed with the wall screen, which is the television, because we already have 3 of them, but we should have the 4th wall done. And it will only cost $2,000, but as he says, that's 1/3 of my yearly income. But she already has 3, she wants the 4th. So he calls 911, the equivalent of that. People come, but it's not medics, it's not a doctor. It's essentially a set of workmen who come with a gigantic pipe, a snake, to pump out her stomach and all of the bad stuff that's in there, but that's not good enough. So they have another device where they pull out all of her blood and they replace it with more blood, because you just have to purify things. But they can't have medical personnel do it because they have to do 10 to 20 of these at night, of people trying to kill themselves deliberately or even inadvertently. Guy's theory about why his wife did this was that she took 2 pills and forgot that she'd taken them, so she took 2 more. And she just sort of kept that up during the evening as she was with the family, as television is known. The family will be on tonight, but she can never tell you what the plot of a story was. So then they go off on another fire one day, where the library that you saw that was the multi-roomed, multi-level library is Mrs. Hudson's library. And they go in and they are dousing everything with kerosene, but their usual way of doing this is to take whoever the owner is and tape their mouth, bind them, and drag them out of the building. She won't allow that to be done. And so they're anxious to light the fire, but she won't leave. And so finally, she sort of gets tired of them, and she strikes the match. And if you saw that scene in the movie, where the woman is surrounded by fire, if you see the entirety of that scene, and you're at all familiar with Catholic theology, you assume that this is the Assumption, because it looks like she literally is going to rise out of the flames. Even you never see her on fire. She actually does fall over, but she's never touched by the flame that the viewer can see. That really touches him. It touches him that somebody is willing to die for a book rather than give them up, rather than they live their life without them. And he manages to steal a few and tuck them in the back of his trousers. But he's seen doing it. And so his chief, Captain Beatty, comes to visit with this little monologue about, in the life of every fireman, you get tempted. Never accuses him of being tempted, but just does this little dialogue that everybody has to delve into this forbidden pastime to see what it's like, but eventually they'll come and they'll turn the books in. So he actually does go and turn in a couple of books. But he goes home and he confesses to Mildred that he's been secreting books. And he starts to open air conditioning ducts and behind the plumbing and places where you would, like inside the toaster, places where you would never think of stashing books, he has stashed them. And she is horrified, because this is against the law. You're not supposed to hide books. He's a fireman. He's not supposed to do this. And so she actually turns him in. So he's in the fire station, and the next call, as they're going out on it, he discovers when they pull up in front of his house, which is that little brick bungalow, plastic brick bungalow, he's there to start a fire in his own home. And Mildred has her suitcase, and she's walking away from this. Everybody else pulls out the books. They find them. Mildred has already pulled out a bunch and put them on the floor. And they start covering them with gasoline, or the kerosene. It's always kerosene. And he has the flamethrower. So he's about to light the books. And he does light the books. But Captain Beatty is in his face, mocking him, goading him. Beatty actually knows an enormous amount about literature. Enormous. To the extent that he keeps quoting from one and quoting the opposite from another book, always setting up this sort of counterpoint, one to the other, and moving him along. And he goads him, and he goads him, and he goads him. And so Beatty just turns around and shoots the flamethrower at him and incinerates him. And in the movie, you actually do see him on fire, not the way you would see it today. This movie was made in the 50s, where they protected our sensibilities a little bit, but you see that. And then suddenly, Guy has to run away. He's no longer welcome in his own land, and he has to figure out where to go. And he's found somebody who knows books, Mr. Faber. In another clip of Bradbury that I've been watching, all of these clips on YouTube and on the internet have many, many more hits, for which I am completely and totally responsible for having watched all of them over the last month or so. And Bradbury will tell you that he doesn't know why he named this guy Faber, and he doesn't know why he named Guy Montag until later he remembers and he sees two things. Montag was a paper-making company, a very famous paper-making company, and Faber had actually two connections to the printed world. One was the publisher, Faber and Faber, out of Great Britain, and the other Faber pencils, if you remember looking at your pencils. And he says that he just wrote all of this stuff, and through his subconscious, and only later discovered, that all the ties that he had put together into the book world. So he's had conversation previously with Faber, and Faber has given him a little device that he can insert into his ear, the green bullet, through which Faber can talk to him regardless of where he is. So he actually has Faber in his ear while he's setting fire Guy is setting fire in his own home. And when he turns, Faber can clearly see him too, although that's not made clear. But when he turns the flame onto Captain Beatty, Faber is screaming, "No, no, don't do that." But he does it anyway. And so he now has to leave. So he goes to Faber and says, "What do I do? What do I do?" And Faber tells him about the book people and how to find the book people. He doesn't quite understand who they are. But Clarice, the young woman he met at the very beginning of all of this, seemed to know about them. In the movie, she knows a whole lot more about them than she does in the book. She's not a very different character, but she's a bit different in the movie than in the book. And Clarice is the first one who opens his eyes, because she doesn't ask how things are done. She asks why things are done. And why is a question that's not permitted in a world that doesn't permit intellectuals. So she really sort of changes his perspective that there are people who question things, people who say why, and it's this very, very young, innocent person who does it. So he finds his way to the book people. And maybe from there we should find out what you thought about this book. So who wants to start? And I have a collection of things up here that I am happy for. These are all my books, but even though they say New York Public on them, they were withdrawn from those collections, and I bought them all on Amazon. And I am happy to lend them to anybody who wants to delve into this more, because this man is actually pretty amazing. When Carola and I were talking about this list and talking about the books, she first said, "Oh, I think I'll do Fahrenheit 451." I went, "No, I have to do that." And the reason I said that was not because I'm the librarian. It was because this past summer when we were at the American Library Association conference, I stumbled on to a program about Ray Bradbury with both of his biographers in the room on the panel. And I have books here by both of them. So hearing the two of them talk about the man as well as the writer really sort of inspired me to spend a lot more time with this particular book. So, Diane.
I think he was very passionate about the issue of media and how media has become so segmented now that people just look at kind of what they want to read, what they already know, without sort of expanding their thoughts. So in that sense, I think he understood modern technology, but I also understand that he wasn't in favor of e-books at all.
Took a long time.
And do you think he would have let his books be read on Nooks or Kindles? I guess is my question.
Yes, actually I do. I don't know if he finally, at the end of his life, did it, or if his estate did, his literary estate, but has licensed some of his works for electronic books. Yeah, but as you go through that, everybody walks around with these little earbuds these days, which have several names in the book. In one place they're called shells, another place they're called thimbles, ear thimbles. And then the green bullet was the other one. Did I miss any of them as I was going through? That was one of my reads, was to go through and write down the technology names for these things. Yes, sir.
One, at the end of the novel, the city is destroyed by a nuclear bomb.
Right.
And that's part of the atmosphere that Ray Bradbury is working on. His novel was published in '53, and the Russians had gotten the A-bomb 4 years earlier. So in addition to the McCarthy,
Right.
hysteria, there was the fear of the nuclear bomb.
That any day
The
we could be
enemy had gotten
disappeared.
the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
So that comes into the picture. It's rather a striking ending,
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
And Mildred dies in that, when the city is bombed. Mildred dies. And he turns to Granger, who's his companion now, the leader of the book people. And he said, I don't think I miss her. Why wouldn't you? Yeah. Who else? Curly.
Wonder if you can take us to where we are today. You raised the question of, would you ban a book and which book would you ban? But also, if we think about why does his book endure in the public interest? Is it because of the illicitness of going against authority? Is it that there are probably some folks who think, wouldn't it be nice if we could ban more books?
Oh,
and
book-
shouldn't we
People are trying to ban
ban
books every
hate
single day.
speech?
Yeah.
So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about today's context.
Well, actually, as librarians, we have this week we celebrate in September called Banned Books Week. And it's not necessarily that everybody was successful in having them banned, but people have tried to have them banned. There's probably not a week that goes by, and I will say principally in the South, where somebody doesn't try to ban Harry Potter because it's magic. And it doesn't fit people's God-fearing images of how people ought to live their lives. As a parent, I served on a book banning panel, a challenge, in Fairfax County Schools. And so I tried not to let them know I was a librarian when my kids were in school, really, because then you get pegged. And I wanted to be a parent more than a librarian, so that you could be invited to be on a whole bunch of things. So I was the parent representative on a book challenge. And when somebody makes a challenge, it sets off an entire sequence of events, because every public library and every school system has put together a protocol for how you will handle these book bannings. Most parents are surprised. They think that you'll just go and take the book right off the shelf, and that doesn't happen. So this particular book was called The Devil on the Court. And when the mother came to the evening that we were going to be discussing this with her, she admitted she'd never read the book. She'd never opened it. She wanted it banned strictly based upon the fact that the word devil was in the title, and that it was inappropriate to be in a high school. And so we talked, and I decided I'm the parent, so I'll talk parent to parent. And I asked her if she knew the story of Faust, of the choices between good and evil. She said, oh, absolutely. And I said, well, if you had read the book, this is the story of Faust, of the choices between good and evil as they play out on a high school basketball team. Because the devil has approached one of the guards, and I can make you the star. And this young man has to choose between good and evil. And he makes the right choice. So it's actually a really good life lesson, put in a context that the young people in the school would have understood. But she didn't care about that. It had the word devil in it. So books are challenged all the time for content, for titles, for impact. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 librarians in the room, right? If you guys want to help me with some of other titles of To Kill a Mockingbird, with the very first book we started this series with, has been banned frequently. Yes.
I understand Fahrenheit 451
Yes.
encouraged in several
Oh,
Say
in
some more about that.
in many cases, the editors went through and changed language that was in it. And I think in the second clip, he will talk a little bit about that. And they just didn't like his language, so they went through, and he never permitted it, but the editors had to send the books back to him. But you could walk into high school libraries, and you will see that things are always marked out in books, because high school's actually worse than middle school libraries, because they just don't want the kids to read these bad words or bad ideas. Hey, say again? Huckleberry Finn.
Bad words.
Yes, bad words.
I can't say you should have edited this book because of bad words, but I found it interesting when he talked about expanding this in order to make money,
Yeah.
turning it into a novel, because I disliked
I hate this book.
much of it. Based on, I thought, this just is this, and now I see he's padded it. That's all. It should have been what it started out as.
A short story.
And I think I'd have been much more comfortable with it. I just kept going, oh my God, he's just throwing all this stuff in here, which made me crazy. But as far as predicting the future, the one aspect of that did resonate for me was that these people just sort of accepted what they gained through these screens, that their TV was on always, and it was people just talking at them. And they accepted whatever was told to them
Right.
from authority. You know, they talk about the war will be
The
quick,
world,
or
yes, the
people will
world,
be back
the
next
war
week,
will
that
start
sort
in
of
2 hours.
thing. But what
Over 4.
even more so was that, oh, we vote for the candidate who looks and sounds authoritative and whatnot. And of course, that we've seen both in debates, but you know, in advertising, and in who statistically we can go back and say it is often the taller candidate or the deeper voice or the whatever who has the presence. So we're all susceptible to that.
To packaging.
Especially if you are in a non-thinking and not reading anything further about it. So
Yeah.
that part did resonate for me, but I did feel the book should have been back to a short story.
Pat.
What strikes me also are the two, the counterpositions of do not ask why and do not inquire versus opening up the whole spectrum of questioning and learning and creating new knowledge. And in a way that reminds me of what we're seeing in the US is the anti-intellectualism that is emerging or has emerged in our society, or perhaps has become more vocal because there's more money behind it. Who knows why, but it's still a counterforce in our society today. It just plays out in different ways.
Did it just take longer to come to fruition? I mean, when he thought he was afraid of it, but maybe it's finally here. Yes, ma'am.
When you were describing the beginning of the book about the argument why the books are useless, and I think there's at present, like, you see lots of people are more into, technology, not e-book. They think it's useless. I mean, I know people like that. It's useless to even read books. It's so someone's opinion.
And it takes so long.
Yeah, it's still so long, and you can go to some website and look it up or something like that. And I think that somehow is happening without even anyone forcing it upon people.
And I think that fundamentally is his principal point, is you don't have to burn them, we just have to ignore them. And the same thing's accomplished without consuming the fuel. I mean, quite literally, if none of us pay attention, if none of us read, if none of us question, where does it leave us? Sound bites. Yeah. Anybody have a favorite character in this? And why?
Favorite, I thought it was most interesting. I wish I had more to say about him, Captain Beatty.
Yeah.
Who is very intelligent, and he's read all these books, and yet he's he's in charge of people, not reading books, and so what, what is going on in his mind here? And how is he not corrupted by what he has read in the past? And is he? He says, I think the fireman can take home a book,
Right.
and so long as it is returned within the next.
Yes, they had very
week or
tight
something,
lending
whatever,
periods.
It's all right, but to be corrupted. In
Yeah,
that
you-
time, it's sort of, he's not absolute about this. So
He's
I
really-
just wondered
Yeah,
about what you thought.
you
about him.
well, I thought that he probably would have been like one of the perfect book people at the end of the book. Somebody who would have, because he can recite so much from memory anyway, that had he not been in charge of this brigade, he actually might have been the renegade who could have become one of the book people at the other end.
Montag was certain that he wanted to go on.
Yes, he was certain.
Exactly, so that, I think, he tries to make the case that maybe the man was so conflicted, that he was like so many of the other characters they describe as being suicidal because of this repression, and that justified his killing this man. This man wanted to die.
Yeah.
That's why
And
he
he w-
goaded
it-
him into.
This book it's quite layered in many ways, and the more you read it, the more you listen to it. For me, listening to it added another dimension to it. There are a couple of different cadences that are used for the different characters in the book, and the book people at the end and Faber. The reader has picked a much more felicitous cadence and tone and pacing than other parts of the book, where Mildred sounds the way he expresses Mildred's voice is as daffy as Mildred is, and so people who read these books have to not act their way through them, but figure out how to interpret them in a way that the rest of us will find faithful to the book. And I thought this one was actually done pretty well in its cadence and its pacing and the way they put the characters to you. And I read more orally than I read in print, only because I drive 2 hours every day, and so it gives me ample opportunity to be able to listen to a lot of books. Peter.
Somewhat coming from Germany, this matter of book burning, of course, has special and traumatic significance.
Does that make you look at the book differently?
I haven't read the book.
Okay.
I have a vague memory of it. But I wanted to get at something else. This issue of the question of, do people still read, and what's the future for books
Yeah.
here in this country and elsewhere? I have the impression that everybody I talk to is in a book club. We go to politics and prose, and it's always crammed. Anne Patchett opened this bookstore and is, very, very successful apparently. So books have been pronounced dead, very often, but they seem to be alive and well. So I'd be interested in views here.
I think it also relates to what your environment is. If you're surrounded by books, if you're in a library or a bookstore, you're more tempted to read. But if you're in an area where there's a lot of electronics, I sort of visualize that room with the 3 TVs in each wall. If you're in a place surrounded by very distracting technology, you're going to it sort of
Sucks you
lowers your
in.
attention span, so that you're more likely to pay attention to the distracting, more entertaining things than something like a book.
Yeah. Anybody want to comment?
I was just saying, I've been going for many years to the National Book Festival in the mall, and I think people are interested in books. You go there, it's just
Hundreds of
a
thousands.
of people of all ages. So there is some interest, but obviously we live in a very educated part of the country. I don't know if that would be true throughout the nation, but I do think I agree with you. I think there's still great interest in a certain type of reading. At the same time, I volunteer here or work occasionally at the reference desk, and I think when people are looking for information, a lot of the students, have learned to look for packets of information rather than full books. Or that's our natural tendency, I should say, we've learned to do that.
Is
We
it
try and
packaged
have
the way
it
I need it?
Beyond that,
Yeah.
because they can get that very quickly.
Somebody remind me to come back to how students study in the library, because we've really been studying how students study in the library. But I saw a hand.
Oh, I was just going to agree with what you said about the, depends on where you live. You're surrounded by people who like to read and books are important and kind of works off in the whole population.
Anne?
I'm thinking about books on tape and the movie Bonfire, or the book Bonfire.
Vanities?
Which I love. The movie was awful. And what I heard was that, I guess it was the director, listened to it on tape. And his sense of it was that it was kind of humorous. I mean, there was a lot of sarcasm on it. But so what you got was more.
Was a different book,
Was a very different
because it
book.
was interpreted by a reader, I mean,
Yeah.
by somebody reading it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you the Library of Congress has a division that produces recorded books for the blind. And I always thought this was weird because there were so many contemporary books now, because recorded books are very popular for more people than just me, but a lot of people. And I thought, why don't they just license that from the regular publisher and make that available to the blind? And they don't, because they don't want anybody interpreting the book. The book is read very much word for word and not interpreted so that the individual to whom it's being read will put their own interpretation on it, which I thought it was completely interesting. And that the Library of Congress has the studios to do this. Some of it they farm out. The majority of it is actually recorded up on Capitol Hill or on Taylor Street, Northwest, where the library has another big set of studios to provide services, both physically and digitally.
Yes, another group reporting for the blind.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's somewhere right around here.
Yeah.
And you can volunteer and go and
And that group will do a lot of sections of textbooks and things that students need, things that need really fast turnaround and might be for a smaller audience. They do a whole lot of those recordings. Yeah, and I kept wondering as I was going through this book, how different would it be to live in this environment that we find repressive, and at the same time get all of your information through your ears or your fingers, but not through your eyes. How different is your interpretation of the world? And I guess I do that a lot because I listen so much to materials that the different sets of senses that are at work when you're physically reading a book, I think we all think still is very different than when you're reading it on a Kindle or you're reading it on an iPad. You've lost that tactile of being in touch with the word. The paper itself conveys something, whether it's, and the type font. I'm very fussy about type fonts. There are certain very popular British fonts that just make me nuts. Because to me, the font itself says, I'm an Edwardian Victorian piece, and I'm just going to be loaded with way too many adjectives. But you develop your own sort of reading habits through these things. Ian.
What if mind confident? I mean, is the book, which was the chicken or the egg?
Right. Right. And now book burning is being done for political reasons. Mm-hmm. I mean, think of the burning of the Quran, and then the political reaction that is, in some cases, probably deliberately invoked by burning it. The burning of the Bible is treated a bit differently because even the ashes are then treated with reverence in a lot of places. So book burning has lots of symbolism in lots of different ways in all of this.
And the Bible was one of the books that Montag stole, right?
Yeah,
In this,
he did. Yeah. And that's why, in the end, he ends up with the book of Ecclesiastes. And in everything that I have read, and every website I have been on, so I have used a lot of technology to study this thing. In no place has Bradbury answered why Ecclesiastes and Revelations, why did he choose those to be the books of the Bible that Montag ends up forming that relationship with.
So was he influenced by Orwell, and was later Margaret Atwood with The Handmaid's Tale influenced by this book? Because I kept
Do
thinking
you have
of-
this edition? Somebody else walked up. Yeah. This edition has a couple of pieces in the back of, some of these just tickled me no end. Harold Bloom takes this book apart in his own typical way, describing it as a period piece. This short, thin, rather tendentious novel has an ironic ability to inhabit somewhat diverse periods. And then another place he said, reading Fahrenheit 451 after many years, I forgive the novel, its stereotypes, and its simplifications, because of its prophetic hope that memory and memorization is the answer. Isn't that interesting? Where, we all think teaching to the test, having kids memorize is the thing they shouldn't be doing. They should be doing scholarly inquiry. And yet, the book people are saving books by memorizing them. And then he goes on to say, Bradbury, though his work is of the surface, will survive as a moral fabulous. Damning with faint praise.
I was just going to mention, it's not a movie that I think is that great, but it was pretty recent. It was the Book of Eli. I don't know if anyone's
I've not
familiar with
seen
that. And essentially, well, Denzel Washington, I'll watch him, as they say, I can watch him read the menu, but he is the Bible at the end. And they're going to take it, and he starts off, and it's, chapter, verse 1 in the beginning, because they think he's actually carrying this Bible with him, but he's memorized it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's funny, I think like this gentleman was saying, this book has, I think, had a huge influence on a lot of the sci-fi writers. And as far as the kind of the repressive culture, if people here may have lived in countries where, in fact, newspapers disappeared or that magazine. I mean, this is, for me, years and years ago. I lived in Spain when Franco was still around. And there were times when you'd go to the newsstand and it just wouldn't be there. You couldn't get the Herald Tribune. But the other thing, the television was horrible. It was almost kind of like that silly pap that Mildred listens to. Because I think part of what we have is the freedom with our books. But I actually think our technology, sure we got all the sitcoms, but there's a lot of great stuff that you can get.
And Mildred never turns it off.
No. But I think about, it's not just the books. I mean, we have that, but we also have good, films and movies and others with the technology. But it's interesting, I think, that when you get the repression of books, I think your popular entertainment is usually pretty awful too.
But one of the things that I did kind of occur to me, the book seems to not just be solely repression of books, but of questioning, of being an individual.
I think that's why my image is the dandelion.
Yeah, of independent thought and independent decision to determine how you will live your life.
Yeah.
And we don't have the book suppression, except in communities that will attempt to pick individual books. But more and more in our society, we're seeing communities, governments make decisions for us, change laws. You can't buy a soda a certain size because that's bad for you. You can't buy products that now somebody else has determined how you will now live your life according to law to be healthy for whatever reasons. And you can say, oh, it's in our best interests, but isn't that how often these things...
It's in your best interest not to have conflict.
Yeah. So what's to eventually, if we get complacent about which freedoms we do keep and which we willingly relinquish, when do you get to a point where it's
You
out
don't
of
get that
control?
choice anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned Margaret Atwood, and she actually has a piece in here too. But there's also a piece. The movie director Francois Truffaut kept a diary while he was on a set, and he keeps it. I gather he keeps a diary kept a diary on all the movies, and so on Wednesday, March the 9th, he writes that the subjects of films influence the crews that make them. During Jules and Jim, everybody started to play dominoes. During La Peau Douce, everybody was deceiving his wife or her husband. And right from the start of Fahrenheit 451, everybody on the unit has begun to read. There are often hundreds of books on the set. Each member of the unit chooses one, and sometimes you can hear nothing but the sound of turning pages. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Yeah, right. I thought so too. Pat.
That we were talking, and he was talking in the film about libraries that have been burned. And the ones that come to my mind as recent disasters were the library in Sarajevo that was bombed from a distance in order, us very forthrightly to destroy the identity and cultural artifacts of a whole population. And then very recently in Timbuktu, where the fundamentalists got into the libraries there and destroyed more than what we even know yet was destroyed. So it's, and in Timbuktu, I mean, literally the things that were there were centuries old.
And in Iraq, if you remember when that war started, the librarians of the National Library put a human chain around that library and would not let anybody in. And I will say quite proudly, the very first people they let in and that they were waiting to get there was the Library of Congress. Because they knew that the Library of Congress would come to protect the materials and would help them. And a man who was on my staff, he was the head of one of our acquisitions program, was actually an Arabist by study, and he had learned Arabic and gone to the university in Iraq. So we made him the head of the delegation. And when he came rolling in and began speaking in their dialect, he said smiles went from ear to ear, and it was just amazing what happened. To be able to stabilize that library and, in many cases, move a lot of materials out. And the Library of Congress took possession of them to be able to send them back. They didn't necessarily leave the Middle East, because the library has offices all around the world. But it was at the request of the librarians there in protecting their patrimony. And one of the reasons the Library of Congress is so successful in many of these countries of getting materials out, because when I was the director of acquisitions, I would go in to them to celebrate their achievements and do, you have to do, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you kind of visit. But also, it was important, frankly, that somebody from Washington go, that you could be taken out to the ministries to thank people and to go to the universities and talk about how important it was to get their scholarship and their research in. Many of the scholars in those countries believe that having it out of their country and having it in an institution like the Library of Congress protects their patrimony. That because it could be lost in their own home country, but if it's at LC and it's been made available to other scholars, it's likely to be photocopied, to be mimeographed. What's that? We're not
Digitized?
Yeah, well, that's what we do now. Microfilm is what we used to do. Microfilm was the word I was looking for. Some days I do now, some days I do. And I've gotten to that stage. You have to get me on the right day. But it's just, it's pretty amazing when you look at the protection of materials. And so I'm always reading books like this, sort of looking at it through the other filter of, what do we do to make sure that books are available, that books are made available. And at some point, if you all want to talk a little bit about ebooks and what that's doing to making them available and not making them available simultaneously, it's a pretty interesting proposition, both for you as individual readers and for us as an academic library or any public library, because you don't own anything anymore. That's the really hard part. Curl.
Actually, on that point of the ebooks and the connective value or the connecting value of the book, I have relatives who used to leave books on park benches once they had finished reading them, so somebody else could pick them up.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do that with an ebook.
It is.
You can
You'd
share
you'd have to give
files,
your whole
you can,
Kindle away.
well, or you can share the file, but there is that concern, just as you were mentioning, about students going for packets of information. Are we able to continue to keep the book not just as something that everybody does because we live in an intellectual community, but that it is in fact a free good, a public good
That's right.
ought to be shared, and how do we think about books as public goods?
And to take that sort of one piece further before we open up for everybody to talk about, as we create, and every other college and university creates online-only classes, it means the resources to support that class have to be online only, because many of our students aren't in any place close to this library to get in to support it. And all of our library services have to be available online as well. So we can do reference, we can do those things through chat, and we do it locally as well as internationally. But when you now have to say, every supporting material for this class has to be available electronically, you can't assume that all the pieces you want can be. One, either because it hasn't been created that way, or two, because the publisher will not give you the right to create a digital edition of it to make it available. And so classes become, that level of material that we can bring to the academic enterprise becomes narrower rather than larger, while the student body can become larger because they are scattered. It's an interesting dichotomy when you start to put it that way.
Well, one of the other changes that's going hand in glove with that is as libraries become a study center and knowledge sharing, but not necessarily anymore a repository of the books. Libraries have fewer books because things have been
in our off-site shelving facility.
sent off-site, but it means for people, alums, others who might come in here or to a public library, there are not always.
They don't see it.
They don't see books there.
And you
they
don't smell them
browse. They don't have the opportunity to say, "Oh, I think I'll take that and read that."
Right.
It's becoming a very different function. So just as we talk about the value from this book, actually having the physical document so people can.
I've almost not put this down.
Yeah.
Even, I think if you've noticed.
We're all moving in a direction that is eliminating
Some of
copies
that.
from the places we used to have as collections.
And yet, you've described that politics and prose is packed with people.
Yes.
Particularly, I mean, how many events do they have on any given day? When you open the Washington Post and you start going through them, and it's like every hour on the hour they have another program going on, and they're always filled, always filled. That happens in lots of communities, and we think that part of it is that coming together tonight, as we are doing, is creating a community. Since we've started this series, every night more of you have come back, and somebody who comes the first time will come back the second and third time. And we're creating our own community of the book by doing this series, and people love it. One of the reasons we thought that our community members, our non-campus members would like it, is because other than tonight, we're turning to faculty members of our teaching faculty, to do the discussion of materials. And when we watched the chairman of the physics department shock himself multiple times, it was scary as he was recreating Benjamin Franklin's experiments. I thought his graduate students got quite a kick out of that evening. Nicole.
So, when Bradbury was talking about the book, he was pretty flippant about it. It's like I wrote it in 9 days.
All right, 9 days.
This was
wrote
my
something.
day. This was my idea. It turned into this. the characters aren't very likable, particularly the women. Why did?
Except for the first young one.
Oh, okay.
And actually,
But she's killed off after 2
Right.
days.
She's gone.
not in the movie. In the movie, she's back.
Yeah.
She's back at the end of the
Also
movie.
as an adult, as opposed to
Yes, yes.
a 13 or 14-year-old child.
And Mildred and
Same
Clarice are the same actors.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
One with short hair, one with long hair, the same actors.
why did it reach the impact that it did to make the list? To make the books list?
I wonder if
That too, but I think in this case, the list of books that shaped America, because it got people talking. He will, now I'm getting confused as to which clip I've seen things in, but in one of them, he talks about the fact that in the first printing of this book, while it got lots of critical reviews, some good, some not, it sold 2,000 copies. That's not a lot. Authors make nothing out of selling 2,000 copies. But he said over the years, it has sold hundreds of thousands of copies because people keep buying it. There is a new generation that has to buy it. There are some schools that teach this book in the 6th grade, and I think that's too young. I don't think you have enough life experience to sort of put it into a context. And there are a couple of books that I reread every year, because every year I have a different, richer context to put them in. And I think I may keep doing that with this one, because I feel differently about it now than I did when I was 21. So shall I read it? Erica.
Well, on the subject of context, I wonder, Anne-Marie made an interesting point when we were first sitting down that this came about during the era of McCarthyism.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that has something to do with
It does
kind
have
of
something
why
to do with
it's
it. Did.
had the staying power that it has, because it's something that was so directly impacting.
But it had something to do with him writing against McCarthyism by showing what could happen if the worst of McCarthyism came true.
Right.
But kids these days know less about McCarthyism than probably a lot of other things.
To like explain its initial hold.
Right. And he uses it in one of it, and it may be actually in this clip that we're going to see. He says he uses this metaphor, and he's all about the metaphor, finding the metaphor to set up the argument. And he uses this metaphor of book burning to actually rail against media and the saturation of inane media that distracts people from everything else in life.
Your picture is a buttercup.
I know, because
But-
we couldn't find a teenager with a dandelion.
With the
We
dandelion.
found little kids, but not the
But his other story, Dandelion
wine. The book
which I read when I was a child and I just fell in love with it. The enemy of dandelions was zoysia grass.
One of my neighbors is putting that in, plug by plug.
Plug by plug. And so in his vision in Dandelion Wine was that you wanted to have lawns that had many dandelions. Why? Because you could harvest them.
Yeah.
The leaves for salad and the flower for wine.
Right. Now, there's one piece that I actually want to read to you because I think this is one of the most beautiful elegies I have ever read in my entire life. And it's Granger, it's one of the bookmen, talking about his own grandfather. And he's talking to Montag. The war has just taken place, the city's been bombed, and Montag says, "My wife's back there." Granger says, "I'm sorry to hear it, the cities won't do well in the next few days." Montag, "It's strange, I don't miss her. It's strange I don't feel anything. Even if she dies, I realized a moment ago, I don't think I'll feel sad. It isn't right. Something must be wrong with me." And then Granger takes over and says, "Listen, when I was a boy, my grandfather died, and he was a sculptor. He was also a very kind man who had a lot of love to give to the world, and he helped to clean up the slum in our town, and he made toys for us, and he did a million things in his lifetime. He was always busy with his hands. And when he died, I suddenly realized I wasn't crying for him at all. for the things he did. I cried because he would never do them again. He would never carve another piece of wood, or help us raise doves and pigeons in the backyard, or play the violin the way he did, or tell us jokes the way he did. He was part of us, and when he died, all the actions stopped dead, and there was nothing to do them just the way he did. He was an individual. He was an important man. I've never gotten over his death. Often I think, what wonderful carvings never came to birth because he died. How many jokes are missing from the world, and how many homing pigeons untouched by his hands? He shaped the world. He did things to the world. The world was bankrupted 10 million fine actions the night he passed on. Isn't that a lovely elegy? You know, I keep thinking, ooh, am I going to be worthy of that someday? So we're going to turn to the last clip. And Lene, there's some papers.
Before we start, would you mind giving us a quick recap of what you've discovered about the way students study in the library these days?
Oh, yes, because we've been studying
You whetted
students.
our appetite.
We have been studying students, and we've been interviewing students because we are rethinking the whole program of service and how the library is going to be organized and arranged and remodeled. And so there are students who will come in with their own laptops and keep them closed and sit down at the library's computers and use the library's computers. So if you go over and you talk to a student and say, but you came with your own laptop. It's okay, you can use ours, but can you tell me why? Because you don't have any distractions on your computers. Facebook isn't on there. All those things that the student regularly does on their own computer is not on ours. So they discipline themselves by using different devices for different purposes at different times of the day. Now we've taken out some of our desktop computers, and we've acquired more tablets and more small devices that students can borrow and they can take away. But it's really interesting if you walk around and watch how they array themselves and their stuff around them. And frequently you will see them sitting at one of the library's computers searching, getting information, and sitting with their own computer recording what pieces of it that they want. I just find it interesting to watch all the mixed metaphors of the various technologies that are going on. Surrounded by books, surrounded by papers. You know, we put together desks that should seat 4 students, and we're lucky if they get 2 because of the way they spread themselves out to occupy space. We know because they've told us that they want light in that building. Our library building is not blessed with natural light. And if you walk the building, as I do multiple times a day, everything fills in from the perimeter of the building to the inside. So whoever gets there first in the morning gets the light. And they keep it, for as long as they can manage to stay there. It's only the interior spaces of the building that get filled last. And so in the remodeling plan that we have, we would tear down many of the interior walls and create a lot more space so that light can permeate the building. So the students will stop referring to it as Azkaban. And if you've read Harry Potter, you know that's a prison. So one of the last quotes I want to give you before we do this one is again one of the last scenes of when he has met the book people and he is becoming one of the book people. It's and I was actually going to title the presentation this, but it's like starting at the back of the book and working your way forward. That we are bums on the outside, libraries on the inside, because they are they're a community of vagrants. They have to move from place to place so they're not found out, and they live in the woods and they live by the river. So we're bums on the outside, libraries on the inside. So this is his speech to is the introduction, him being introduced, coming up? Because we can skip that part. Yeah, just go to where he is.
Good
completed stories
Yeah,
and
we can skip
poems,
this,
has
please.
won every
Every conceivable honor. Now, he's very frail, but wait till he opens his mouth.
Thank you. Oh, this is great. I got out of acting when I was 21. The reason I'm here tonight is because I quit acting, because I couldn't remember the goddamn lines, huh? But I discovered lecturing was a wonderful substitute, so I could just get up here and say anything I wanted to say off the top of my head. And tonight, there's a lot I want to say because I recognize the need of many of you to be writers, and you don't want to do the wrong things. So for at least 5 minutes, I want to talk about the hygiene of writing for you, so you won't do anything wrong in the next year. The first thing that comes to mind is the danger of writing novels to start. I don't know how many of you are writing novels now. If they're going well, you don't have to listen to me. But the problem with novels is you could spend a whole year writing one, and it might not turn out well because you haven't learned to write yet. But the best hygiene for beginning writers or intermediate writers is to write a hell of a lot of short stories. If you can write one short story a week, doesn't matter what the quality is to start, but at least you're practicing. And at the end of a year, you have 52 short stories, and I defy you to write 52 bad ones. Huh? It can't be done. It can't be done. At the end of 30 weeks or 40 weeks, or the end of the year, all of a sudden, a story will come that's just wonderful. That's what happened to me. I started writing when I was 12, and I was 22 before I wrote my first decent short story. That's a hell of a lot of writing, millions of words, because I was doing everything wrong to start, of course. I was imitating. I had so many heroes that I wanted to be like. I liked H.G. Wells. I loved Jules Verne. I loved Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, for God's sake. Jeeves, I loved Wodehouse. Well, you can't be any of those things, can you? You may love them, but you can't be those. I loved Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzan, John Carter, Warlord of Mars. Good Lord, wonderful stuff. The Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum. You know, I always dreamt someday I could grow up and write an Oz book, but it's not to be, not to be. So the main thing I want to start with tonight is to get you to writing more short stories. And then you'll be in training, and you'll learn to compact things. You'll learn to look for ideas. And the psychological thing here is that every week you'll be happy. Huh? At the end of a week, you will have done something. But in a novel, you don't know where the hell you're going. Huh? At the end of a week, you don't feel all that good. Huh? At the end of a month, I've been through novels. I waited until I was 30 before I wrote my first novel. And that was Fahrenheit 451. It was worth waiting for, huh? But I was fearful of novels. I recognized the danger of spending a year on something that might not be very good. And your second novel might not be very good, or your third one. But in the meantime, you could write 52 or 104 short stories. And you're learning your craft. That's the important thing. Read people like Roald Dahl. Get his books of short stories. Get the short stories of Guy de Maupassant. Get John Cheever, who's done some very good short stories over and above his novels. Richard Matheson in my own field. An author named Nigel Neal, K-N-E-A-L-E, Nigel Neal. Read his short stories. John Collier, one of the greatest short story writers of this century, and you've never heard his name, huh? Try and look him up. He's out of print right now. I'm trying to get him back in print next year. John Collier, English writer. He wrote brilliant short stories, deeply affected me when I was 22 years old. The more quality short stories you read from the start of the century, Edith Wharton's short stories, you save her novels till later. There are many women writers who influenced me. Catherine Ann Porter, her novellas, all the short stories of Wharton. The Curtain is Green by Eudora Welty, wonderful short stories. The more of these you can take in, and stay away from most modern anthologies of short stories because they're slices of life, huh? They don't go anywhere. They don't have any metaphor. Have you looked at the New Yorker recently? Have you tried to read one of those stories? Didn't it put you to sleep immediately? Huh? They don't know how to write short stories. Go read Washington Irving. Go read the short stories of Melville. Go read Edgar Allan Poe again. Huh? Go read, I was trying to think of some of the other authors from the start of the century. Nathaniel Hawthorne, a writer of fantasy. In the science fiction field, many collections of short stories, because they all deal with metaphor. And the sooner you recognize the ability of seeing a metaphor and knowing how to write the metaphor and to make collections of them, the better off you'll be. Then you'll be ready for the novel. Maybe some of you here tonight are automatically good novelists, so I'm not talking to you. You're fortunate that you were born that way. But I discovered along the way I was a collector of metaphors. Now I don't know how I can teach you to recognize a metaphor when you see it, but what you've got to do from this night forward is stuff your head with more different things from various fields, hygienically speaking. I'll give you a program to follow every night, very simple program. For the next 1,000 nights, before you go to bed every night, read one short story. That'll take you 10 minutes, 15 minutes, okay? Then read one poem a night from the vast history of poetry. Stay away from most modern poems. It's crap. It's not poetry. Huh? It's not poetry. Now, if you want to kid yourself and write lines that look like poems, go ahead and do it, but you'll go nowhere. But read the great poets. Go back and read Shakespeare. Read Alexander Pope. Read Robert Frost. Huh? But one poem a night, one short story a night, one essay a night for the next 1,000 nights. And from various fields, archaeology, zoology, biology, all the great philosophers of time, comparing them. Huh? Read the essays of Aldous Huxley, read Lauren Isley, great anthropologist. You can't do better than that. Maybe you've never heard of him. Lauren Isley, E-I-S-E-L-E-Y. He was head of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania. And he became my friend 40 years ago. I read an essay of his in Harper's, The Fire Apes, which was so brilliant. I wrote him a fan letter. And I said, "Dear Dr. Isley, The Fire Apes is the finest essay written in the last 20 years in any American magazine. Why don't you write a book?" He wrote back and said, "Hey, that's an idea. I think I will write a book." And he wrote 17 books. But I was his papa, huh? Even though I was 15 years younger. So reread all of the books of Lauren Isley. They're crammed with pomegranate ideas. That's why I want you to read essays in every field. On politics, analyzing literature, pick your own. But that means that every night then, before you go to bed, you're stuffing your head with one short story, one poem, and one essay. At the end of 1,000 nights, Jesus God, you'll be full of stuff, won't you? Huh? You'll be full of ideas and metaphors, along with your perceptions of life and your own personal experiences, which you put away. and what you see in your friends and your relatives. So you want all these things to go in, and the more metaphors you can cram yourself with, they'll bounce around inside your head and make new metaphors. That's why you're doing this. But you've got to be able to recognize one when you see one. So hygienically speaking, you've got two things to do. If you feel you have to do a novel, in spite of what I said, go do it. But in the meantime, write a hell of a lot of short stories, and then every night do these three things with the short story, the poem, and the essay. And you're well on your way to being more creative, huh? The next thing is get rid of those friends of yours who make fun of you and don't believe in you. And when you leave here tonight, go home, make a phone call, and fire them. Anyone doesn't believe in you and your future, to hell with them. I've had my fill of that. I had people I thought were my friends, but secretly they thought I was a nerd, yeah? Because I wanted to be a writer. I sold newspapers on a street corner from the time I was 19 till I was 21. I made $10 a week. This is back in 1939, 1940, 41. People came by my corner and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Becoming a writer." They said, "You don't look like one." I said, "Yeah, but I feel like one." I was filling myself. I lived at the library. I never went to college. Couldn't afford to do that. But I went to the library 3 or 4 days a week for 10 years. And I graduated from the library when I was 28, huh? You live in the library. Live in the library, for Christ's sake. Don't live on your goddamn computers and the internet and all that crap, you know? Go to the library. Don't let them flim-flam you into owning all these devices. They can be very valuable and very good for certain kinds of things. Certain kinds of businesses, great. But I lectured at the downtown library in LA 3 years ago, and I signed the guest book, but the name above mine had been signed the day before by Bill Gates, huh? The great technological expert. And underneath Gates' name I wrote, "I don't do Windows."
And that's where I've decided to end this. Isn't he terrific?